Let's look now at the Spartacist Revolt, the first of the revolts against the Weimar government that we'll look at. So the Spartacist Revolt, if you remember, it happened in 1919. First question we'll ask ourselves is, was there in fact, is it right to call what happened in Germany in 1918 to 1919, which led to obviously the abdication of the Kaiser and the establishment of the Weimar government, was it a revolution? Well, the government certainly lost power. And workers' and soldiers' councils, if you remember, these were called Soviets in Russia, took control. So in this sense, it sounds a little bit like the Russian Revolution. The Kaiser abdicated, and Ebert then, however, declared a republic and said that elections should be held for a national assembly. Now, this is where it differs certainly from the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917 in Russia. So the Kaiser's abdicated, and there's now a National Congress of Councils. So still at this stage, it could possibly progress towards a Soviet-style model, but it doesn't, because in December of 1918, these workers' councils meet in Berlin, but they're largely comprised, the majority are moderate socialists. They do believe in a left-wing socialist government, which means, more taxes on the rich to help the poor in a very simplistic way. But they support elections for a national assembly. The Spartacists, however, the more extreme members of the left wing, effectively communists, they disagreed with this. And these were their reasons. Their thinking was, look, if we have more elections, then the upper and middle class Germans will still run Germany. We'll still have a very unequal Germany of rich and poor. But we should have a socialist Germany. That was their thinking. And so the two leaders, Karl Liebknecht, you can see on the left there, and Rosa Luxemburg on the right, took part in January of 1919, an armed uprising occurred. This is the so-called Spartacist Revolt. And as they were afraid the workers would lose out, they had a chance to really rebuild a workers' Germany, but it seemed to them that this new democracy was heading down a similar old route of inequality. So in January of 1919, there is the armed uprising. So what does Ebert do? Ebert himself, remember, is left-wing. He is, however, moderate. He's a moderate socialist. And he believes that Germany needs law and order more than the socialism, certainly the extreme socialism of the Spartacist uprising. Now, what can he do, though? There's an armed uprising. It has to be met by force. He couldn't rely on the army, because if you remember, that had been dissolved after the armistice. There wasn't really an army. So he decided to use the Frei Corps. They hated socialism and communism. Well, who were the Frei Corps? They were mostly ex-servicemen. As I said, they hated communism. They were paramilitary, which means that they were not an official army. However, they did have uniforms and weapons. They were as well right-wing. That means they were very conservative in their politics. They believed in, the Kaiser and an authoritarian, old-fashioned form of government. So the Frei Corps did end up crushing the revolt. If you look at the picture on the bottom right, any group which chooses a skull and crossbones for its emblem, they're not going to be handing out flowers, are they? So, how did they crush the revolt? In a particularly brutal manner. They were basically public executions. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were both brutally murdered. Rosa Luxemburg's body was later found floating in the river. The surviving Spartacists now looked at the government of Ebert. They looked at the moderate Weimar government and they thought it was a betrayal. That the so-called left-wing government had allowed a brutal right-wing group to crush the Spartacists. So this effectively turned the KPD and the communists against the democratic Weimar government. This was going to come in very significantly later on when the KPD refuses in any way to support the SPD and other moderate coalitions against the future rise of the Nazi Party. So in summary, it was a limited revolution. It evolved into a highly democratic Germany as the workers' councils, the so-called Soviets in Russia, actually supported elections. The Spartacists disagreed with these new elections and felt that in order to ensure a fair Germany for the workers, they would have to have a revolution, and Ebert then used, although he was left-wing himself, used the right-wing Frei Corps to crush this rebellion. The KPD, the communists, saw this as a betrayal of their erstwhile left-wing brothers, the SPD. So I hope you made some good notes there, and good luck with the quiz.